I never thought I'd end up living in a rusty train high in the mountains with 3 children who only understood hunger and cold. But in 1980, when the town became too small for my misfortunes, I had no choice but to climb that dirt road, carrying hope in my torn pockets. I had heard about the old abandoned train since I was a child. No one went near it. They said it was cursed. I didn't care. The only thing that scared me was watching my children starve. The wind beat against the broken windows of the carriage as I pushed the door open for the first time. The echo of metal answered like a lament. Inside, it smelled of rust and loneliness. My children stared at me, waiting for me to perform a miracle. And in a way I did. I spread out some old blankets, lit a candle, and promised them this would be our new home, at least until God said otherwise. The nights were cold, the days endless. Each dawn, I asked myself if I had done the right thing. But something deep inside me, a voice that refused to give up, told me the ending hadn't been written yet. That train, though lifeless, could move again if one believed hard enough. Over time, the children stopped being afraid. I taught them to fetch water, to laugh at hardship, to give thanks for a bowl of rice. And amid the smoke of our small fire and the silence of our prayers, I began to feel that this train hadn't chosen us by chance. Sometimes I think it wasn't destiny that took me there, but love. Because what I found in that train, among the ruin and the silence, was not misery, but the beginning of everything I am today. That train became my refuge when everything else collapsed. My husband had died in an accident at the factory where he worked, and with him went every bit of security we had. In town, people could offer me nothing but pity, and pity didn't fill 3 empty stomachs. The house we lived in was no longer ours. Debt devoured it like rain devours mud. I remember looking at my children that night. Anna, the oldest, barely 10, trying to comfort her brothers as if she were grown. Miguel, who still slept holding a piece of wood as if it were a toy. And Samuel, the youngest, who wouldn't stop asking for his father. I promised myself I wouldn't cry in front of them again. If there was a mountain to climb, we would climb it together. The abandoned train stood on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pine trees and fog. I climbed up with what little we had, a pot, some blankets, a rosary, and an old wedding photo. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I opened that rusty door. There were broken benches, shattered glass, and a silence so deep it seemed to listen to my thoughts. But something told me it wasn't the end. I felt a presence, a strange calm, as if that place had been waiting for us for years. That night, as my children slept, I prayed for the first time in a long while. I didn't ask for wealth or miracles. I only asked for strength not to give up. And that's how our new life began. Inside a train the world had forgotten, but where God still passed every morning. The first dawn in the train was a blow of reality. The cold seeped through every crack, and our breath turned to smoke inside the carriage. There was no fire, no bread, no certainty. I sat on the floor with my children and tried to smile. I told them it was an adventure, that the train was a gift from heaven. But inside, I was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the fear of not knowing what we would do next. I fetched some water from the nearby stream and boiled the little we had. A few potatoes and a piece of hard bread. Miguel asked if the train would ever move again. Maybe, I said. But for now, we're the ones who have to make it move. He didn't understand my words, but smiled anyway. That smile was enough to give me strength. Far away, the town was waking up to the sound of roosters and carts. No one knew we were up there. I didn't want to ask for help. I had learned that other people's compassion, though well-meant, sometimes weighs more than hunger. I preferred to fight alone. Each day I cleaned the carriage. I swept the dust, removed the glass, and hung an old sheet to divide our room. Anna wrote on the wall with a piece of charcoal, "Home of the Diaz family." When I saw it, I laughed. It was crooked, ugly, but it was ours. For the first time in months, the train stopped feeling like a shelter and began to feel like a home. Every afternoon, I went down to the town looking for work. No one needed a widow with 3 children. Some offered me bread, others advice. But one day, Doña Matilde, a kind elderly woman who owned a small bakery, asked if I could help her knead dough. I didn't hesitate. In return, she gave me bread and milk for the children. I came back to the train with my soul full and my hands covered in flour. The nights were still harsh. Sometimes the rain hit the metal roof so hard it seemed the sky was breaking open. The children got scared, and I hugged them until the sound of water turned into a lullaby. In those moments, I understood that it wasn't the train that gave us shelter, but our unity. As the days passed, wildflowers began to grow near the tracks. It was as if life itself wanted to remind me that nothing dies completely. I picked them and placed them in tins by the windows. The carriage, once a coffin of iron, began to fill with color. One afternoon, while scrubbing the floor, I found a small wooden box hidden beneath a seat. Inside was a rusty crucifix and a yellowed note. For those who still believe. I shivered. I hung it above the door. From that day on, something changed. I don't know if it was faith or coincidence, but the days began to feel lighter. Every night before sleeping, we said a short prayer together. Not for miracles, but for gratitude. We thanked God for the soup, for the bread, for the train. Anna said God must have a station in heaven, and maybe that train had once passed through it. Her innocence made me cry silently. It was then, amid poverty and silence, that I understood hope isn't found in places. It lives in people. That rusty train became a witness to our resilience, and though I didn't know it yet, it was about to show me that even what the world discards can shine again. Mornings in the mountains began to have a different color. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows of the carriage, painting the walls gold. The children woke before I did to gather firewood and fetch water. We had learned to survive with little, but also to be thankful for each new day. The train, that sleeping giant, seemed to breathe alongside us. One afternoon, while I washed clothes by the stream, a man approached. He wore a patched shirt and a worn hat. He introduced himself as Tomas, the town carpenter. He said he'd heard that a woman was living with her children in the train. I didn't know whether to feel ashamed or relieved. He smiled and said, "I didn't come to judge. I came to help." And he kept his word. A week later, he came back with boards and nails, and together we repaired the doors of the carriage. Seeing someone work for us without asking for anything broke me. No one had looked at me without pity in a long time. Tomas didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were simple and sincere. Sometimes he brought bread, other times stories from his youth. My children adored him. With his help, we made small repairs, a table from old wood, patches for the roof, a rope to hang clothes. The train began to feel like a home. Every corner bore our mark. Anna painted flowers with charcoal on the walls, and Samuel said the train smiled when we lit the fire. One Sunday, the town priest came up the mountain. He said he wanted to see the famous Train of Hope. He brought me an old Bible and gave us his blessing. He looked into my eyes and said, "God doesn't always give what we ask for, but he never stops giving what we need." His words stayed with me. Days passed, and I started selling bread and sweets in town. Doña Matilde taught me her recipes and let me use her oven at night. With the money, I bought flour, oil, and a simple dress for Anna. It was modest, but watching her spin before the mirror inside the train was like watching life bloom after a long winter. Sometimes, when I was alone, I sat by the train door and watched the valley. I remembered my husband, his laughter, his calloused hands. Maybe he was watching us from somewhere, proud of what we had built. I no longer cried from pain, but from gratitude. One stormy night, as wind shook the carriage, Tomas arrived soaked. He brought a lamp and fresh bread. He stayed with us until the storm calmed. The children fell asleep, and he looked at me quietly. "You're stronger than most people I know," he said. I didn't know how to reply. I just nodded, my heart beating faster than it had in years. From that night on, something changed between us. It wasn't love yet, just respect, understanding, the certainty that even amid abandonment, two souls could find each other. And in that shared solitude, the train filled with laughter, bread, and faith. Looking back, I realized the miracle wasn't survival. It was learning to believe again. That abandoned train taught me that life doesn't end when everything is lost, but when one stops dreaming. And for the first time in a long while, I dreamed again. Even now, I can smell the scent of fresh bread mixed with the cold mountain air. Mornings began to have meaning again. I walked down to town with a basket of bread wrapped in cloth, my children following me through the fog. At first, people stared. A widow from the train selling bread was almost a legend, but little by little their looks changed. Pity turned into respect. Doña Matilde let me use her oven regularly. In return, I helped in her bakery. I learned recipes, tricks, the art of kneading with love. In the evenings, we came home with the scent of bread clinging to our clothes. Ana helped me arrange everything. Miguel delivered bread in town, and Samuel's job was to taste the first loaf, as if he were our little food critic. One day, while selling in the plaza, an elegant woman asked where we lived. I hesitated, but Ana, with her innocence, said, "In the mountain train." The woman fell silent for a moment, then smiled. "Then that train must hold miracles. No one comes down from there looking sad." Her words made me realize that the change wasn't only in us, but in how the world saw us. With what we earned, I bought a few hens and a used sewing machine. Inside the train, I set up a small table and began sewing for the neighbors. Each stitch was a prayer, each finished garment a victory. The children played around me, and the train filled with voices and life. Tomas kept visiting us. Sometimes with wood, other times just company. He built a small fence with flowers around the train and said, "It's not much, but every home deserves beauty." Maybe he did it for the children, or maybe for me. But every gesture of his carried a tenderness that healed. Our afternoons were filled with laughter, bread, and songs. People started coming up just to share a cup of mate or watch the children play by the rails. The train, once a symbol of abandonment, became a place of gathering. People called it the Train of Hope. One summer evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Tomas asked me to go with him to the old station. He wanted to show me something. We walked among rusty tracks until we reached an old locomotive covered in dust. On its wall, someone had engraved, "Trains never die, they just wait for another journey." He looked at me and whispered, "Just like people." A tear escaped my eye. That night when we returned, the children were asleep. I looked at the crucifix hanging on the door and realized the real miracle wasn't finding shelter. It was learning to love life again. The train no longer felt sad. Every gust of wind told our story. Loneliness had turned into gratitude. And in my children's eyes, I saw the same spark I once had and thought I'd lost forever. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear the distant whistle of an imaginary train. Maybe it's the wind. Or maybe my heart reminding me we're still moving forward. Because even if that train never moved again, we did. With the strength of love and faith. 2 years had passed since that first night. Sometimes I still couldn't believe all we had lived through. The train was still there, solid, as if it too had found its purpose by giving us shelter. The sound of wind through the trees had become part of our routine, a melody that accompanied every loaf baked, every laugh from my children. The town no longer saw us as those from the train, but as part of its people. The children went to school, and neighbors came up on Sundays to share lunch with us. Doña Matilde said my bread tasted like hope. I'd smile, knowing she was right. Hope was the ingredient we never lacked. Tomas had become part of our lives. We never spoke of love openly, but gestures said enough. Sometimes he stayed late, fixing things or telling stories from his youth. One night, after the children fell asleep, he confessed he'd lost his wife long ago. "I thought I'd never feel at home again," he said, "until I found this train." His words struck me like gentle lightning. I said nothing, just placed my hand over his. It was enough. The winter of 1982 was the harshest of the decade. Snow covered the tracks and the wind howled from the mountains. Still we endured. The train seemed to protect us, as if it knew it couldn't fail us. Tomas built a small stove from old cans, and that spark of fire became our sun. Each night we gathered around it, talking about dreams yet to come true. Anna wanted to be a teacher, Miguel a carpenter like Tomas, and Samuel, though still small, said he'd buy a real train one day so Mama wouldn't have to live in an old one. We laughed, but inside I promised myself we'd get there. One morning, a reporter from the local newspaper came up to interview us. He had heard of the widow of the mountain train. He wasn't after pity, he wanted inspiration. The article was titled, "The Train That Came Back to Life." After that, people from other towns began to visit. Some brought donations, others just came to hear our story. I never liked being the center of attention, but I understood something. Our story wasn't just ours. It belonged to everyone who had lost everything yet still chose to go on. Each visitor found a piece of themselves in that train, the proof that even from ruin, one can be reborn. With the donations, I opened a small bakery in town. I called it the Bread Carriage. The children helped after school, and Tomas built the sign by hand. On our first day open, the train sat empty for a while. I looked at it from afar, and for a moment, it seemed to smile, like a mother watching her children set out, proud and at peace. Sometimes when we came back at dusk, the train seemed to wait for us with its gentle silence. I'd touch its metal and whisper a thank you. That piece of iron had been my salvation, my teacher, my temple. Today, when people ask how I made it through, I always answer the same, with faith, work, and love. Because if there's one thing I learned between those forgotten rails, it's that miracles don't fall from heaven. They're built, little by little, with faith in your hands and a heart willing to keep going. The train was still there, just as it had always been, though we no longer slept in it. Our new home, small but warm, stood just across the river. Still, we visited the train every morning. It felt like part of our family. My children greeted it in passing, and I, without a word, touched its old iron door and silently gave thanks. The bakery thrived. The town, once so quiet, now smelled of fresh bread at dawn. Each loaf was a reminder of what we had been: flour, sweat, tears, and hope. Sometimes customers asked me to tell the train story, and I did, not to boast, but to remind them that the hardest beginnings are often the most sacred. Tomas remained by my side. We never married in church, but before God and my children, we were a family. He built benches outside the bakery and sat there every afternoon watching the kids play. Sometimes he'd look at me and say, "Clara, do you see it? That train didn't just save you, it found me too." I'd smile, knowing he was right. Winter returned, but it no longer scared us. Fire, laughter, and the scent of bread were enough to chase away any shadow. The children grew strong, each carrying something from the train: faith, patience, gratitude. Samuel, the youngest, still said that one day he'd make it move again. And though I smiled, part of me wanted to believe he could. One morning at sunrise, I climbed to the train alone. I carried fresh flowers. I wanted to thank it for everything it had done for us. When I opened the door, the air felt different. It no longer smelled of rust, but of wet earth and life. Sunlight poured through the window where the crucifix hung. In that moment, I swear the train breathed. I sat on one of the benches and remembered our first night there, the children huddled under blankets. I thought of the fear, the hunger, the tears I'd hidden so many times, and understood that everything had had a purpose. Without that pain, I'd never have met the strength that slept within me. When I came back down, I felt lighter, as if I had left part of my past behind. Tomas was waiting by the oven. He hugged me without a word. None were needed. We both knew. The train had fulfilled its mission. As years passed, more families came to visit. Some painted it, others left flowers. The abandoned train atop the mountain became a symbol of faith. No one called it a ruin anymore. Everyone knew it as the miracle train. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear a soft whistle drifting down from the mountain. My children say it's the wind. I know it's not. It's the train, reminding me that life always has another journey waiting, if you dare to believe. Now, when I look back, I feel no sadness, only gratitude. That desperate widow found, amid iron and loneliness, a reason to keep going. It wasn't the train that changed my life. It was what I learned inside it. That faith isn't prayed, it's lived. That love isn't found, it's built. And that even the hardest roads can still lead you home. Sometimes life takes you down paths you never chose, strips you of everything so you can discover what truly matters. I lost my home, my husband, my sense of safety. But in that abandoned train, I found something greater. The certainty that even in pain, God never stops writing. Today, my children are grown, and each carries a piece of that story. The train still stands high in the mountains, now a symbol of hope. Sometimes we go together, bringing fresh bread and flowers. We sit in silence, listening to the wind through the trees. In that silence, our story still lives, along with the echo of every prayer we once whispered, when we had nothing. And every time the wind blows through the rails, I close my eyes and smile. It wasn't destiny that brought me there, it was love. Because where there is love, there's always a train waiting for a new beginning.